Hey folks, this is Riker with another video on Diablo 4, a possible Diablo 3 expansion, all that stuff. But first, here's the too long didn't watch on the news. 3 new job postings have appeared on Blizzard's site for the Diablo franchise, with one specifically mentioning Diablo 3. That's a too long didn't watch version for those of you who just want the news or don't have time to watch the whole video. Now we're going to go over details on all this, as well as reevaluate our theories on what's coming in the future of the Diablo franchise. Will it be a second Diablo 3 expansion? Will it be Diablo 4? Will it be World of Diablocraft? Let's dive into this, and it was just recently, the end of last week, that we announced that all the job postings for Diablo franchise job listings have been removed. I took this to mean that all the jobs had been filled. Someone countered with, well, what if the project was just cancelled? Yes, that is a possibility. However, if they would have canceled the project, would they not have removed all the job listings at once? Again, the job listings slowly disappeared over the course of months, as others were cropping up. It was last week that the final job posting, Game Director, disappeared. So what seems more likely is that the positions were filled over time. Another argument that these job postings didn't mean something new was coming in the world of Diablo were that they could have been hiring for a different project. In other words, Blizzard is working internally on some secret project, something like when they were hiring for Titan, for instance, and they simply made it under the guise of a Diablo job posting. Well, my counter to that is that the job postings all specifically said they were looking for people with a passion for Diablo and often called to that dark, gothic look. In the job descriptions, in the requirements, they would always put as a plus someone who's really passionate, has a lot of knowledge about the Diablo universe. So while yes, I agree that Blizzard does sometimes hire for secret projects under the guise of a different job posting, they wouldn't be so specifically adamant about wanting people who know Diablo and are passionate about Diablo if they weren't hiring for something Diablo related. Alright, on to the 3 new job postings. We have one for Senior User Interface Designer, one for Technical Artist Rigging, and one for User Interface Designer. Now, these job postings differ from the ones that have cropped up over the past years. Those all specified it was for an upcoming game, an unannounced Diablo game, or an unannounced game in the Diablo universe. These don't refer to an unannounced game or an upcoming game, they just refer to joining the Diablo team, or Diablo games, very generally, or all things Diablo. None of them really specified a project, apart from one, the User Interface Designer, in which case they actually specifically say Diablo III. To selectively quote, Blizzard is looking for a User Interface Designer for Diablo III. The UI designer will conceptualize the visual style for Diablo 3 and any future projects with the franchise. Now, this is the first job posting specifically for Diablo 3 in, I want to say, at least a year, if not a lot longer than that. So this could serve as an argument against Diablo dead game kind of thing, or Diablo going into maintenance mode. If they're hiring a user interface designer, that would suggest that they're looking for new UI elements to incorporate into the game. But something noteworthy here is that while this is the one job posting specifically for Diablo 3 in the longest time, it is the one job posting that does not anywhere mention that the ideal candidate should have extensive knowledge in Diablo or a passion for Diablo. So remember how we just said that Blizzard could hire for a secret project under the guise of a different project? I'm not saying this is likely, but of all the job postings we've seen, this is the most likely a case in which Blizzard might be hiring for a secret project, because they're not specifically saying you must be a super Diablo nerd. Another interesting thing for the technical artist is one of its requirements, where it says that the ideal candidate should have a minimum of 3 years experience designing, creating, and supporting complex character, facial, and weapon rigs in Maya or the equivalent 3D program. And I'll specifically call out the facial rigging. Very simply, this is taking a 3D model and animating its face, be it its facial expressions or its mouth opening and closing when it speaks. Now, I don't think, and I don't know for sure, but I don't think Diablo 3 currently uses any facial rigging. I tried to go into game and I tried to zoom in on the character to see if I get it to say an emote if your character moves its mouth, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but if it does, the animation is very small and very subtle. And it doesn't seem like something so important as to call out in a job description. Now, you can argue this could be for the cinematics, where you definitely would want that, but Blizzard's cinematic department is a whole separate department. They hire their own animators, their own stuff, just for that. And this position, if you look at the rest of the write-up, is very clearly for in-game rigging. So my impression from this is that this isn't for Diablo III, at least not in its current state. This is for some more advanced engine, and again, a lot of the old job postings that have gone up over the past year have very clearly indicated a new game engine for whatever new project is in the works. And it would make sense that in that new game engine, maybe facial rigging will be more important, depending on what direction they take the project. So overall, it seems that a lot of people regard these new job postings as evidence or proof that there's no Diablo 4, there's no Diablo II remake, that this just confirms continued development on Diablo 3 or Diablo 3 expansion. And while I'm not saying that's definitely not the case, I think we need to take a step back and reevaluate all the possibilities again and re-examine the evidence and see how this new evidence, what different light it might cast the old evidence in. So we're going to go over the possible projects now. And do note, though, that there could theoretically be a dozen different Diablo projects in the work right now. It's unlikely, but it's a possibility. More realistically, they could have maybe 2 projects in the works. Maybe something like a Diablo II remaster, as well as a new game. And I'm just saying this because, just because, let's say, a Diablo 4 is in the works, or just because a Diablo 3 expansion is in the works, it doesn't rule out that a different Diablo project could also be in the works. I'll also remind you guys of the tweet by the official Diablo Twitter account a few weeks ago, saying that BlizzCon will be really cool this year. A reminder, this will be Diablo's 20th anniversary. Okay, so possibility number 1 is that it's just continued development of Diablo 3. There's nothing new coming, no expansion, no new game, it's just Diablo 3 continuing into the future. They're hiring more positions for Diablo 3 to fill up the staff that has either been moved to World of Warcraft or bled away from Blizzard, which would suggest that more features will be coming to Diablo 3. Again, that is the first possibility. So to support this, we have that one job posting that specifically states Diablo 3. That's pretty good evidence. But apart from that, there's not really any other evidence that suggests that we should expect major new free content coming to Diablo 3. That job posting as well could be hiring under the guise of operating on Diablo 3, and maybe there might even be some little work to do, because even if Diablo 3 is full-on in maintenance mode right now, there still could be some little UI things, little jobs to be done with respect to the user interface. But you can hire that person to work on Diablo 3's UI, do a little work there, but then move him on to the other Diablo project. It would be a little odd that they just decide to do this with this job posting and not the others, but it is within the realm of possibility. Now, one pretty strong argument against more major free content coming to Diablo 3 is that it's not a business model that Blizzard has been following with any other of their games right now. Blizzard has ways to monetize all their other games. So those games that do receive free content updates have other means of monetization through microtransactions. StarCraft 2 right now is the closest thing to Diablo 3's pay model, where you buy the game and that's it. But even StarCraft 2 now has moved to microtransactions via mission packs. So it makes financial sense for Blizzard to continue developing content for StarCraft 2 because they could monetize it. As a business, as much as a fan, I would love to keep getting free content for Diablo forever. I understand that Blizzard is a business. They're going to look out for their bottom line, and the bottom line is that they have to pay salaries if they're going to get people to work on free content. So they gotta monetize at some point. The problem is, there's nothing like mission packs that you can monetize for Diablo 3. The closest thing would really be just cosmetics. And I just don't see Blizzard monetizing cosmetics, not in Diablo 3, maybe in a new game, but right now they've been giving us all the cosmetics for free. How would the fan base react to suddenly having to pay for things that Blizzard's been just giving us for free? A lot of us would have no qualms with that, but a lot of people would. And I think with Diablo 3 specifically, Blizzard's in a state where they don't want to upset people any further. Reaper of Souls did a lot of work to reclaim goodwill after the botched launch of Diablo 3. There's no way they can suddenly start monetizing cosmetics and not have that used against them and make that vilify them and demonize them. And I say this as someone who would have no issues with paying for cosmetics in Diablo 3. Now, another argument against this just being continued D3 development is all those job postings over the past year of stuff that clearly requires a new game engine. There's tons of features that we're being hired for that are outlined in job descriptions and stuff that the D3 engine just does not do. That would mean that if Diablo 3 were to be continued and all these job positions were being hired for just continued development of D3, that D3 would have a complete engine overhaul. That a new engine's being developed and they're going to redo, because that's what they'd have to do. It's not just like, oh, you press upgrade and the status bar takes an hour to go to completion. No, like you got to remake the game on a new engine. You got to re-rig the models. You got to, like, there's a lot that would go into. They would basically be rebuilding the game from scratch on a new engine. And I can't see them doing that for a game that they're not going to continue monetizing. It's a huge amount of work. You can argue, well, Valve did it with Dota 2. They moved from the Source Engine to the Source Engine 2, sticking with the same game. Yes, but that game has an ongoing monetization model. They made back that money. And you can argue, well, in China, Diablo is making money. In China, Diablo is a free-to-play game with microtransactions. And my understanding is that it's very lucrative. So, maybe the Chinese market is enough to carry the financial burden of Diablo 3 on its back for the rest of the world? It's certainly within the realm of possibility. I don't know. The last argument I'd say against this just being continued D3 development is all evidence suggesting that D3 is now in maintenance mode. That we will not have any new major content coming. You can point to patch 2.3, 2.4. Those are the patches where we saw a huge amount of new content come to the game, but a lot of people suspect that that was content that was for a planned paid expansion. An expansion that has since been scrapped. I'll further point to all the cosmetic items they released in, what was it, 2.3? I think it was 2.4 or one of the subsequent patches. Blizzard released a ton of just cosmetic transmogs. These were all items that they had the artwork done for, that they could have saved, and maybe they probably were saving many of them. They were saving these items for future items they would release in the game. So it seemed to me in releasing all of those unused art assets as transmogs, it's basically saying we have no plans on making any new items that'll use these art assets. But that's just my opinion. Next possibility, that we're getting a second expansion to Diablo 3. And again, with these latest job postings, it seems most people are thinking that this is what they've been hiring for all along, a second expansion. People are saying that the job postings from as of over a year ago, all this has been just for the next expansion to Diablo 3. Again, I point to the fact that this is going to be on a new engine. I'm not going to say that I don't think an expansion is in development because of that, but I do think that for the positions where they were hiring for a new engine, that I don't think that is for an expansion. While an expansion would be the optimum time to actually rebuild a game on a new engine, do consider that they can't just make the new content on the new engine. They literally have to go back and take all the old content and redo it on the new engine as well. Even assuming that there was backwards compatibility, even assuming that all the old content could just run fine on the new engine and just not look any different, then you would have this discordance between the new stuff and the old stuff. Why even bother having a new engine if 90% of the content isn't look the way it used to, and just a little bit of the new, like what, you're going to have one new class that's going to look new and improved? It's possible that they're remaking the whole game on a new engine for the expansion, but I think that would mean that they're expecting to sell a lot of copies. Again, an argument in favor, though, of the expansion is that the UI guy they're hiring for Diablo 3 could super easily be for the Diablo 3 expansion as well. That wouldn't even be a misleading job posting. There's also tons of hints that a second expansion was planned. Just in the lore, in the story itself, you've got that cliffhanger ending where It suggests that the Nephilim might turn evil. You know, I think all the evils as well have just been released again. You've got all that talk about the Scovos Isles. Tyrael and his little buddy won't shut the hell up about that. So clearly, there was some intent at some point to make a second expansion. But it could have been scrapped. The question is whether it was or whether development has been ongoing on it. Now, another argument in favor of there being a second expansion is that it could make financial sense to make an expansion as opposed to another game. Making a game from scratch is a ton of work versus making an expansion, which is still work, but not nearly as much. And you can sell another expansion for $40. So $40 versus $60, and for the $40 you're doing just a fraction of the work. Also, with the game presumably still making money in China via microtransactions, another expansion, even released for free in China, would further bolster the player base there and encourage more microtransactions. And if you look at the timing of all this, an expansion isn't too unlikely, especially if it's going to release in 2017. Diablo III released in 2012. Reaper of Souls released 2 years later in 2014, so add another 3 years, 2017. So if we get a BlizzCon reveal of the expansion, it would be safe to assume a 2017 release. That would be 5 years since the release of Diablo III. Again, StarCraft 2 is the closest game to Diablo 3 in the Blizzard world right now with respect to business model. And we had StarCraft 2 released in 2010, its first expansion released 3 years later in 2013, and the second and final expansion released 2 years after that in 2015, for a total of 5 years past initial launch. So a 2017 launch for a second expansion for Diablo 3 seems perfectly on schedule. Next possibility is a remaster of Diablo II and or Diablo I. This is pretty possible. Blizzard has stated that they want to remaster their old games. They explicitly were hiring people to do this, to remaster their old games. It is super likely that a remaster is in the works, and it's pretty likely that we'll get that announced and revealed at BlizzCon. Further proof for this is that at Gamescom, they invited Mr. Llama, the Diablo II speedrunner. Next possibility is a Diablo II HD version. Again, a remaster is not an HD version. A remaster is taking the old game and just polishing it to run properly on modern systems with maybe some small tweaks. Again, a little spit and polish. The classic example is the Baldur's Gate remaster to be playable on tablets. As for a Diablo II HD, by which I mean remaking the game in 3D and modern graphics, which is something that a lot of people are hoping for, and I would absolutely adore, but I'm sorry to say it makes about 0 sense. Yeah, tons of people want this, for sure, myself included. But does it make sense for Blizzard to make this? To take a game from the 90s and just remake it in modern graphics? If they were to do this, then what about when you run into the quality of life issues, right? Lots of improvements, lots of evolution has happened in the ARPG genre since the 90s, or since 2000. So, are they going to ignore that? Are they going to keep in all the old, issues, if you want to call them? Are they going to ignore all the quality of life changes in order to retain that old experience? It's a catch-22. They're going to piss people off no matter what. If they change elements of Diablo 2, then it's going to upset people. But if they don't change things, then they're just specifically catering to a nostalgia audience. They're not making a game that's going to see a wide appeal to a new market. They're specifically targeting people that played this game in their youth. But those very nostalgia people could get upset, and I guarantee you some would, if Blizzard starts picking and choosing changing things. And I guarantee you as well that regardless of how astounding the art direction might be, there will still be people complaining or saying, hey, it's still not quite the same, I don't know, the soul isn't quite there, or you just can't fight the effect of rose-colored glasses. You can't fight that nostalgia effect. A remake of Diablo II in amazing graphics will not have the same impact as the original. The only thing Blizzard would accomplish in remaking Diablo II is pissing off a bunch of people. The best way for Blizzard to keep the Diablo 2 people happy is by not touching Diablo 2 and letting people maintain their fond memories. Next possibility is Diablo IV. And the biggest argument against this is that it just seems way too soon. Diablo III is only 4 years old, and the modern development cycle for Blizzard seems to put sequels at a much larger time gap. Diablo I released in 96. Diablo II released 4 years later in 2000. Then Diablo III released 12 years later in 2012. Similarly, StarCraft I released in 1998. StarCraft II released 12 years later in 2010. As for Warcraft, Warcraft 1 was in 94, Warcraft 2 was in 95, and Warcraft 3 was in 2002, 7 years after Warcraft 2. These aren't rock-solid arguments or rock-solid reasoning, but on the whole, it does seem premature for us to get Diablo 4. People are still buying Diablo 3. It's not an entirely dead game. And again, in China, it's still making ongoing money. So if they release a Diablo 4, then they're basically cutting off all sales on Diablo 3, or at least severely limiting them. However, in favor of a Diablo 4 is the new game engine. But that doesn't necessarily point to Diablo 4 specifically, just some kind of new Diablo game. And as for the whole DICE conspiracy thing, I'm 95% sure it's just coincidental, it's just being a conspiracy theorist. I'm 95% sure there's nothing to it. And the only reason I'm not saying 100% sure is because you can always roll a 20. There's always that 5% chance, right? But again, I had one of the lead developers of Dungeons & Dragons, a guy who damn well knows his dice, comment and say that he's seen plenty of printing errors happen on 4-sided dice. That it's really not uncommon to see printing errors on 4-sided dice. Alright, on to the final possibility, which does kind of branch off into a lot of things, and that's another Diablo game. Something that's not one of the other things we've covered, but is still a new game in the Diablo universe. With the new engine, this makes perfect sense that there's some new game in the works. Something with more advanced graphical functionality than Diablo III currently has. Some people have pointed out similarities to the Overwatch engine. And it makes sense for Blizzard to actually release a new game, because the competition is coming. We've got games like Lost Ark that are positioning themselves to muscle D3 out of the market. And continued development on D3 or even an expansion probably won't be enough to contend with all the hype that these other games are getting. This could also be an argument in favor of a Diablo 4. Whatever new game is in the works, I can almost guarantee you that Blizzard is very well aware of the upcoming threats, the upcoming competition, and I'm pretty sure they're positioning themselves to be able to tackle that. So some people are postulating that the new game could be something like The Witcher, or maybe like Skyrim or Dragon Age. That it's some kind of third-person RPG or ARPG, possibly something open world. Now, Blizzard has never done a game like that before, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't. While Blizzard does tend to stick with its own genres, it has branched out in the past. Warcraft started as a strategy game, and then turned into an MMORPG. In fact, before World of Warcraft, there was actually going to be a Warcraft point-and-click adventure game. StarCraft, always been an RTS, except for StarCraft Ghost, which, again, was cancelled just like Warcraft Adventures. But that was going to be like a third-person style stealth game, like Metal Gear Solid. So Blizzard is definitely cool with doing different styles of games within its universes, or even just attempting game types it's never attempted before, as seen with Overwatch, as seen with Heroes of the Storm and Hearthstone. So the idea that Blizzard would look at the success of games like Mass Effect and The Witcher, and would want to reproduce the success of a narrative RPG, a story-driven RPG set in the Diablo universe, it's not that far-fetched at all. The story, in fact, could even be a prequel to Diablo, or a spin-off. This wouldn't interfere with a possible Diablo 4. Some people are theorizing that it is World of Sanctuary, or basically whatever they would call a Diablo MMORPG. I highly doubt this is the case. World of Warcraft is their MMORPGs. Currently, you do not see any competition among Blizzard games. In the past, Warcraft and StarCraft were both their RTS franchises. Note that there's not been any wind of a Warcraft 4. StarCraft was the chosen one to remain as the RTS. World of Warcraft. Warcraft was the MMO. Diablo was the ARPG. Overwatch is their FPS. Hearthstone is their card game. Heroes of the Storm is their MOBA. It doesn't make sense to divide your MMORPG fanbase Like, there's so much competition in the MMO market already. Does it make sense to compete with your own brand? Some argue, well, World of Warcraft is on its last legs, it's dying. Yeah, it's been dying for about 5-10 years now. The fact is, if Warcraft is dying, it's because the MMORPG genre and business model is dying. Blizzard's not going to make another new MMORPG that's going to compete, that's going to replicate that success. They know that. They know they got magic in a bottle on that, and they're clinging to it. And they're going to ride it out until it's driven into the ground. And beyond that, a world of Diablo just wouldn't be as popular as a World of Warcraft. As much as I love the dark fantasy aesthetic, high fantasy is more accessible to everyone. I guarantee you the people making the marketing decisions are not going to have faith in a product called Diablo that's about heaven and hell and think that that's going to be okay, that that's going to supersede the popularity of a fictional world that offends no people. Another theory is a Dark Souls-style Diablo game. Again, I don't think this is likely. Dark Souls, while an amazing series, is exceptionally niche. It's successful, but in that genre, it's like basically the only big successful name. There's not a ton of money to be made in that market. Is Blizzard going to dive into a market that isn't rolling in the green? Anything new that Blizzard will attempt is a risk. And the people making the decisions are going to weigh risk versus potential reward. That's how decisions are made. Risk versus reward. If Blizzard attempts a new genre, like they did with Overwatch, like they did with Heroes of the Storm, it's because they saw the potential that the amount that they would invest would pay off. Because the FPS market is enormous. Call of Duty, right? Battlefield. The MOBA genre. League of Legends. Dota. Blizzard wanted a piece of that. You can counter with, well, what about Hearthstone? Card games aren't super popular. Yes, but Hearthstone was developed by a very small team, committing very little resources. Hearthstone became super successful, but it was a very small risk. A Dark Souls game is a lot more involved than a card game, and would be a much bigger risk. Besides that, this whole point is moot, because if you look at Blizzard's design philosophy over the years, all of their games are now very casually accessible. And that is the absolute antithesis of a Dark Souls game. The only way that Diablo can make a Dark Souls game is if they removed that punishing difficulty. A sort of Dark Souls light kind of thing, and sure, that is possible. If they do just a light, fun action RPG that focuses more on the combat and killing without it being difficult and punishing, that I could believe would be something Blizzard would make. The final possibility is that Blizzard is working on a mobile Diablo game, and there's no real evidence for this, nothing concrete at all, and the only thing that might be hinted at would be that a remaster of D1 or D2 could potentially be made mobile compatible, but there's no evidence to suggest that Blizzard is making a dedicated mobile game. So that's it, folks. That covers all of our possibilities. What do you think? What do you think is in the works for Diablo? What do you think will be announced at BlizzCon? And what do you hope to see? Sound off in the comments. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. Check out these other videos and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders to stay informed of Diablo news.
This just in, breaking news. As of today, September 30th, it has been announced that Season 7 will end on Friday, October 14th. And Season 8 will begin Friday, October 21st. What could this premature ending of Season 7 signify? What could the lack of PTR and abrupt start of Season 8 mean?